She pointed at him in front of 400 people and said, "Someone get this man out of my party." The room laughed. He didn't flinch, didn't argue, didn't even raise his voice. He simply picked up his delivery box, nodded once, and turned toward the door. But before his hand touched that handle, an older man across the room stood up so fast his chair scraped the marble floor. His face went completely white. His wine glass slipped from his fingers and shattered, and in a voice that shook, he whispered one name. That name. The laughter died instantly, and Victoria Langford, CEO of a billion-dollar empire, felt something she hadn't felt in 20 years. Pure, cold fear. Drop a comment right now and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button. You do not want to miss where this goes. The night of the Langford Tech Anniversary Gala was the kind of night that made powerful people feel even more powerful. 400 guests, black tie. A venue so expensive that the flower arrangements alone cost more than most families earned in a month. Crystal chandeliers threw warm gold light across faces that had been on magazine covers, across hands that had signed billion-dollar contracts, across people who had spent their entire careers learning how to look comfortable in rooms exactly like this one. Nobody paid attention to Ethan Carter when he walked in through the side corridor. Why would they? He was carrying a box. He wore a dark suit, clean-pressed, respectable. But it wasn't the kind of suit that came with a personal tailor and a 6-week waiting list. It was the kind of suit a man buys when he needs to look presentable, but doesn't have time to think about it because he's been up since 5 in the morning, making sure his daughter got to school on time and the workshop orders were finished before the deadline. Ethan was 35 years old. Broad-shouldered, quiet-faced, with calloused hands, and the kind of steady eyes that come from years of doing things alone. Not lonely. Alone. There's a difference, and Ethan Carter understood it better than most. He wasn't there as a guest. He was there to deliver a commission, a set of 12 hand-crafted commemorative books, hand-bound in leather with embossed covers and personalized dedications for the company's senior leadership. The order had come in 8 months ago. He'd spent weeks on it. Real weeks, late nights at the workbench after his daughter Lily went to sleep. Selecting the right materials. Getting the typography right. Making sure every single page was worth the hands that would hold it. It was the kind of work Ethan did because he believed it mattered. Not because anyone would notice. He found a young event staffer near the edge of the ballroom and showed her the work order. "These are for the Langford anniversary, commemorative books. I was told to deliver them directly tonight to avoid any shipping risk." The staffer looked at the paperwork, looked at the box, and then looked past him, like she was trying to find someone more important to deal with. The event coordinator was supposed to handle deliveries. "Can you just wait over there?" "Sure," Ethan said. He stepped to the side. He waited. Around him the party moved like a current he wasn't part of. Servers floated past with champagne flutes. A jazz quartet played something smooth and forgettable near the far wall. Couples leaned into each other, laughing at things that weren't funny, performing enjoyment for an invisible audience. Ethan stood there with his box and watched. He wasn't uncomfortable. He wasn't bitter. He was simply present the way a man is present when he's learned that most things in life require patience, and that impatience is usually just ego in disguise. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. He checked his phone. He had one message from Lily. "Dad, did you eat dinner? Don't say you forgot again." He smiled and typed back, "I ate. Don't worry, be home by 9. A lie probably, but the good kind. He put his phone away and looked around for the coordinator again. He spotted someone near the main entrance who looked like they might be in charge, headset, clipboard, the particular expression of someone managing 17 problems simultaneously. He started walking toward her. And that's when it happened. A server carrying a full tray of wine glasses cut across the room too quickly, moving to avoid a cluster of guests who'd stepped backward without looking. The tray wobbled. The server corrected. But the correction sent 2 glasses sliding off the edge of the tray, and they hit the floor 3 feet from Ethan with a crack that cut through the music. Red wine spread across the marble. Red wine. Whoa, boy. People nearby stepped back. Someone gasped. A woman in a white gown made a sharp sound and moved away fast. Ethan's immediate reaction. The kind of reaction that comes from being a father and a craftsman from years of cleaning up messes, because there was nobody else to do it, was to crouch down and start carefully moving the broken glass away from the area before anyone stepped on it. He wasn't the server's supervisor. He had no obligation. He just saw a problem and moved toward it the way he always did. He had no idea that Victoria Langford was standing 12 feet away. He had no idea she was watching. And he had absolutely no idea what she was about to do. Victoria Langford was by any measurable standard extraordinary. She had taken a struggling mid-sized tech company and turned it into one of the dominant forces in the industry over the span of a decade. She was 41 years old, sharp as a scalpel, and she had built every piece of her professional reputation on the belief that the details mattered, that how a room looked, how a presentation felt, how a company carried itself in public was a direct reflection of the people running it. She had spent 3 weeks personally overseeing the arrangements for this gala. She did not tolerate disruptions. When she heard the glasses shatter, she turned immediately. She saw the spreading red stain. She saw the guests who had jumped back. She saw the disruption to what had been, until 30 seconds ago, a perfectly managed evening. And she saw a man crouching on the floor in an ordinary suit who did not belong in her ballroom. She didn't ask questions. That was her first mistake. She walked across the room with the full authority of someone who has never had to second-guess a decision in her professional life, and she stopped directly above Ethan, and she looked down at him, literally down at him, because he was still crouching, and she spoke loud enough for the nearest 30 people to hear every word. "Excuse me?" Ethan looked up, then, "Who let you in this entrance?" she said. Her voice was controlled but cutting. The voice of someone who was angry but had learned to weaponize composure. "This is a private event. Service personnel use the delivery entrance, not the main floor." Ethan stood slowly. He met her eyes. He didn't look embarrassed. He looked assessed, like he was calibrating what was actually happening here. "I understand," he said. "I was directed here by your event staff to wait for the coordinator. I'm making a delivery, the commemorative books for the anniversary. I have the work order if you'd like to." "I don't need to see a work order," Victoria said. "I need you to collect whatever you brought and exit through the appropriate entrance. We have 150 staff members who know where they're supposed to be. You are clearly not one of them." "Why?" A woman nearby, a board member's wife draped in something that probably cost more than a car, let out a small, delicate laugh. Just a quick exhale of amusement, the kind that signals permission to others. And others took it. Not everyone, not even most people, but enough that the sound carried. Ethan looked at the woman who laughed. Then he looked back at Victoria. "I apologize for the inconvenience," he said. Not apologizing for himself, for the inconvenience. There's a difference, and the way he said it made Victoria feel for one strange half-second like she'd missed something. "I'll find another way to complete the delivery." He picked up his box. He turned toward the door. He was almost there, almost gone, almost just a quiet story that nobody would remember after the champagne wore off, when a voice came from somewhere near the center of the room. "Wait." It was deep, old, shaking slightly. The voice of Harold Mercer. Harold Mercer was 73 years old and had been on the Langford Tech Board of Directors longer than most of the current executives had been working in the industry. He was the kind of man who didn't speak often at social events, which meant that when he did speak, people paid attention. He was standing now, and his face had gone a color that nobody in that room had seen on him before. Something between white and gray. "Young man," Mercer said. "What's your name?" Ethan stopped, turned slightly. "Carter," he said. "Ethan Carter." The room was still doing what rooms do, the ambient noise of 400 people, the jazz quartet, the gentle clink of glassware. But in the immediate vicinity of Harold Mercer, something changed. Mercer looked like someone had reached into his chest and stopped his heart. "Ethan Carter," he repeated, and then quieter, almost to himself. "My God, that Ethan Carter." Yene, the woman beside Mercer, another board member, Diane Cho, who had been with the company nearly as long, looked at Mercer's face. Then she looked at Ethan. And her expression changed too. Not as dramatically, but changed. "Harold," she said quietly. "Are you sure?" "Look at him," Mercer said. His voice was barely above a whisper. "The hands. The way he—" He stopped. He straightened. He looked at Victoria. And for the first time in Ethan's entire interaction with the CEO of Langford Tech, nobody was laughing. "Victoria," Mercer said. "Do you know who this man is?" "Mo." Victoria was still standing near the center of the room. Her expression was composed. She was always composed, but something behind her eyes had shifted. The certainty was gone. Just slightly. Just enough for someone paying attention to notice. "He's a delivery person," she said. "No." Mercer shook his head. He looked at Ethan with something that wasn't quite guilt and wasn't quite grief, but lived somewhere between the two. "No, he is not." He took a slow breath. "This man is the reason this company exists." You could have heard a pin drop. Not the cliché version of that expression. The literal one. The silence that falls when a room full of sophisticated, educated, successful people simultaneously realizes they are missing something enormous, and that the missing thing has been standing right in front of them this whole time. Victoria didn't move. Ethan didn't move either. He held his box in both hands. His face was unreadable, not blank, but deliberately still, the way a person goes, still when they're waiting to see what someone else will do with a situation before they decide what they themselves will do with it. "Harold," Victoria said carefully. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the origin engine," Mercer said. He walked toward Ethan slowly, and there was something almost ceremonial about it, the way an old man crosses a room when he is moving toward something he believes matters. "I'm talking about the core architecture that this entire platform was built on. The infrastructure we've been improving and building around for 15 years. He stopped in front of Ethan. He looked at him directly. "Ethan Carter wrote it. Every line. Before we were a real company, before we had funding, before we had a board or a marketing department or a legal team or a gala." Ethan said nothing. "He built the thing that built this," Mercer said. And then he walked away. Victoria's throat moved. "That's not possible. The founding team was—" "The founding team took over," Mercer said. "After he left." He paused. "After he had reasons to leave." He turned to look at Ethan again, and there was a weight in what he said next that the room clearly felt. "How's your daughter?" he asked. And something shifted in Ethan's face, just briefly. The stillness cracked very slightly around the edges. "She's good," he said. "She's 10 now, doing really well in school." Mercer nodded slowly. Her mother would be proud. The silence that followed that sentence was a different kind of silence. Victoria Langford had been in rooms with difficult silence before. She'd sat through hostile boardrooms and brutal quarterly reviews, and the particular quiet of a negotiation going sideways. She knew how to read silence like a landscape. But she didn't know how to read this one. Because this one felt like something she hadn't been prepared for. Accountability. She looked at Ethan, really looked at him maybe for the first time since he'd walked into the room, and what she saw wasn't what she'd assumed. What she saw was a man who was not angry, who was not performing dignity, who simply had it, who had walked into this room carrying a box full of things he'd made with his own hands, been publicly humiliated in front of hundreds of people, and was still standing there without cruelty, without bitterness, without any apparent desire to burn anything down. And somehow that was worse. Somehow that was much, much worse. "Mr. Carter," Victoria said. Her voice was measured, controlled, but something underneath it wasn't. "I owe you an apology." Ethan looked at her. He tilted his head very slightly like he was deciding something. "You owe me a coordinator," he said, "so I can complete the delivery." One or two people laughed. It wasn't the earlier laughter. This one was different, the kind that comes from release from recognition, from the slightly painful moment when someone unexpected turns out to be the most composed person in the room. Mercer laughed too, low and real. "He always was like that," he said to no one in particular. "Straightforward, no drama, just get the thing done." He looked at Ethan one more time. And beneath the relief of seeing him, there was something else, something older, something that looked very much like regret. "It's good to see you, son," he said quietly. Ethan nodded. "You too, Harold." Ethan left the gala 90 minutes later, and he completed the delivery. He spoke briefly with the event coordinator, made sure the commemorative books were properly logged and distributed, and declined 3 separate offers of champagne from staffers, who now, following Mercer's declaration, were treating him with the particular attentiveness of people trying to correct a first impression before anyone could remember what it was. He didn't stay for dinner. He didn't give a speech. He didn't ask to speak with the board. He walked to his truck in the parking structure, set the empty delivery box in the back, and sat in the driver's seat for a moment in the dark. He pulled out his phone and called Lily. She picked up on the second ring. "Dad, it's 8:57. You're going to be late." "I know, I'm leaving now." "How'd the delivery go?" He looked out through the windshield at the parking structure wall. Concrete, fluorescent light, ordinary. "It went fine," he said. "Somebody recognized my name." A pause. "What do you mean?" "From a long time ago, before you were born." Another pause. The kind where a 10-year-old is deciding whether to ask the next question or let it go. "Dad," she said, "are you okay?" He smiled. That specific smile he only ever smiled when Lily surprised him, which was often. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I'm okay." "Okay, drive safe. I left the porch light on." "I know you did." He started the truck. He drove home through streets that didn't know his name, and in the ballroom behind him, Victoria Langford stood beside Harold Mercer, near the edge of the room, the celebration still moving forward around them, and she said the thing she needed to say before she could think about anything else. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" Mercer was quiet for a moment. "Some things," he said slowly, "people decide it's easier not to talk about." For 15 years, Miss, he looked at her, and there was no gentleness in what he said next, only the hard clarity of a man who'd carried something for too long and was relieved finally to set it down. "You built this company on what he created, Victoria, and you didn't even know his name." He paused. "Maybe that answers your question." She said nothing. The jazz quartet started a new song. The chandelier light caught the wine stain still visible on the marble near the far wall, and somewhere across the city, a man with calloused hands and quiet eyes pulled into a driveway where a porch light was burning. He went inside to check on his daughter, like he always did, like he'd always done. Victoria Langford did not sleep that night. That alone was unusual. She had trained herself over 20 years of executive life to sleep efficiently. 6 hours. No exceptions regardless of what was happening in the world or the company or her own head. Sleep was a tool. Rest was strategy. Emotion was something you processed between meetings, not at 2 in the morning when you were sitting at your kitchen counter with your laptop open and a cold cup of coffee going stale beside you. But here she was, 2:47 in the morning, eyes wide open. She kept coming back to the same moment. Not the moment she'd pointed at him and told him to use the service entrance. Not the laughter that followed. Not even the look on Harold Mercer's face when he went the color of old ash. She kept coming back to what Ethan Carter said when she apologized. "You owe me a coordinator. No bitterness, no performance. Just move forward. Get the thing done." Who was this man? And she opened the company's internal archive system. She had full administrative access, one of the privileges of running the organization, but she'd never had reason to go deep into the founding era files. The company had a mythology the way all successful companies do. There was an official story, a founding narrative. She'd told it herself at conferences and interviews and shareholder presentations. She typed in the name, Ethan Carter. The system returned 47 results. Most of them were tagged with a date range she hadn't expected 15 years ago when she was still working her way up through the ranks of a different company entirely before she was recruited to take the leadership position at Langford Tech. Before. That was the key word. Before her. She clicked the first file, and it was a technical specification document. Dense, detailed, written in the kind of clean mathematical language that engineers use when they're building something they believe in. The document was dated 16 years ago. The author field at the top read E. Carter. She didn't understand half the technical language, but she understood the architecture diagrams. She understood the foundational logic, and slowly, with the particular chill of someone beginning to grasp the shape of something much larger than they'd expected, she understood what she was looking at. This was the Origin engine. Not an improved version, not a descendant, the original. The thing Harold Mercer had talked about in front of 400 people while his hands were shaking. She clicked the next file, and the next, and the next. By 4 in the morning, she had read through 11 documents, 3 internal memos, and a partnership agreement, so old that the company logo on the letterhead was a version she'd never seen before. And what she found in that partnership agreement made her set her coffee cup down very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands aren't fully steady. Ethan Carter hadn't just contributed to the company's early technology. He had built it. The agreement was explicit. He was the primary architect of the platform. He held original ownership. He had built the foundation while working alone, no team, no resources, no salary, on the understanding that when the company grew, his contribution would be recognized and protected. And then something happened. Yes, the records got vague after a certain point. Documents that should have been there weren't. Files that referenced earlier agreements didn't include the attachments. There were gaps, small ones, careful ones, the kind of gaps that don't announce themselves, that only become visible when you're looking for them specifically. Victoria was now looking for them specifically. She picked up her phone and called the one person she knew would answer at 4 in the morning. Marcus Webb had been her head of legal for 6 years. He was meticulous, occasionally infuriating, and constitutionally incapable of letting a question go unanswered. She heard him pick up on the third ring, groggy but present. "Victoria, it's 4 a.m. I know. I need you to pull everything we have on the founding era agreements. Anything involving an Ethan Carter. Original contracts, amendments, exit documentation. Everything." A pause. The sound of movement. He was already sitting up. "Ethan Carter, the delivery guy from tonight." He wasn't a delivery guy. Her voice came out flatter than she intended. "Get me everything. First thing tomorrow." "You mean first thing today?" "Yes." Another pause. "Victoria, what did you find?" "I don't know yet," she said. "That's the problem." She hung up. She sat in her kitchen in the dark for another hour before she finally went to bed. She didn't sleep, but she went to bed. And she lay there thinking about a man who had built something extraordinary and then walked away from it and spent the next 15 years making handcrafted books with his calloused hands, while the thing he built turned into a billion-dollar empire with his name erased from the story. And she thought about his daughter. And she thought about Harold Mercer's face when he said her mother would be proud. And she thought about the particular quality of Ethan Carter's silence in that ballroom. Not the silence of someone who had nothing to say, but the silence of someone who had decided a long time ago that some things weren't worth saying to people who weren't ready to hear them. She closed her eyes. She wasn't ready to hear it yet, but she was getting there. Marcus Webb arrived at the office at 7:45 the next morning with 2 coffees and an expression Victoria had never seen on him before. In 6 years, she had watched Marcus Webb navigate hostile litigation regulatory audits, a whistleblower situation that could have ended careers, and a merger negotiation that ran for 11 consecutive months. He was a man who had developed over decades of legal work the ability to deliver bad news with the emotional temperature of someone reading a weather forecast. He was not doing that now. He set 1 coffee in front of her. He sat down. He put a folder on the desk between them, and he put his hand flat on top of it, not sliding it toward her, just resting it there, like he needed a moment before the folder became real. "Talk to me," Victoria said. "I've been in those files since 5 this morning," Marcus said. "And I want to be very precise about what I'm going to tell you, because the implications depend entirely on precision." "Marcus, there is a charitable foundation," he said, "established 16 years ago, concurrent with the original founding agreement. It was set up in the name of a woman called Claire Carter." Victoria was still. "His wife." "His wife," Marcus confirmed. "She died of a sudden cardiac event when their daughter was 4 months old. The foundation was Ethan Carter's condition for the original agreement. He didn't ask for a large salary. He didn't ask for equity beyond a certain threshold. But he required as a contractual condition, not a request, a condition that a percentage of annual revenue be directed to a medical research foundation in Claire Carter's name, specifically targeting research into the kind of sudden cardiac events that killed her." He paused. He wanted to make sure what happened to his wife couldn't happen to someone else's family. Victoria's throat felt tight. "What happened to the foundation?" Marcus opened the folder. "For the first 3 years the contributions were made," he said. "Not as large as they should have been. There are some accounting irregularities in that period that I'd want a forensic team to look at more carefully, but contributions were made. The foundation was active. It was funding 2 research programs." And then Ethan Carter left the company. Marcus turned a page. 18 months after his wife died, he exercised an exit clause and divested his ownership position. He received a settlement. The settlement amount was... He stopped. He looked at her directly. The settlement amount was significantly below what his original equity stake was worth, even at the company's valuation at that time. "How significantly?" "Think about what this company is worth today, Victoria." She looked at him. "And then consider that he walked away for a figure that at today's valuation would represent less than 0.1% of what he should have received." The silence in the room was a different texture from the silence the night before. This was not the dramatic silence of a public revelation. This was the cold, hard silence of a woman who had built her professional reputation on integrity, staring at evidence that the institution she led had been built at least in part on the opposite. "The foundation," she said, after he left. "Defunded," Marcus said simply, "within 1 fiscal year of his departure. The contributions stopped. The research programs were discontinued. The foundation technically still exists as a legal entity, but it has been dormant for over 13 years. It has no funding, no activity. And the funds that were supposed to go into it..." He placed a specific page in front of her. "They went elsewhere." "Where?" "Operational expense accounts that I cannot fully trace without a forensic audit. But Victoria..." He leaned forward. "Some of those accounts belong to individuals who were on the original executive team, people who knew Ethan Carter, people who signed the original agreements." He paused. "People who were at the gala last night." Victoria picked up the page. She read it. She set it down. She stood up, walked to the window, and stood there with her back to Marcus for a long moment. He let her. He understood that she needed the space to process what came next, because what came next was going to require her to make decisions that would define everything. "How many families?" she finally said. "I'm sorry." She turned. "The research programs the foundation was funding. If they had continued, if the money had actually gone where it was supposed to go for the past 13 years, how many families might have benefited?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "That's not a legal question, Victoria." "I know it's not a legal question. Answer it anyway." He exhaled slowly. The research focus was on sudden cardiac arrhythmia, early detection genetic screening intervention protocols. The field has advanced considerably in the past decade. If those programs had continued and contributed to the research trajectory. He chose his words with the weight of a man who understood they mattered. "The researchers I spoke to this morning estimate that the work could have reached thousands of families. Prevention interventions, early screenings that could have caught conditions before they became fatal." Victoria nodded once, the way you nod when someone confirms something you already knew in your bones. "Get me a forensic audit team," she said. "Today, not next week, today. And I need everything documented, the original agreements, the foundation records, the expense account transfers, all of it." "Victoria." Marcus's voice was careful. "This is going to be significant. If what I think is in those accounts turns out to be what I think it is, we're looking at potential fraud. People who are currently on the board, people with lawyers, people who are going to push back extremely hard." "I know." "And Ethan Carter, has anyone told him any of this?" She was already walking to her desk. "Not yet." "Don't you think he deserves to know?" She stopped. She thought about a man standing quietly by the door of her ballroom with a box in his hands, being laughed at by people who owed him everything and didn't even know it. She thought about a foundation named after a woman who died young, named because her husband loved her and wanted her death to mean something beyond loss, and how that love had been used and then discarded by people who thought it was safe to do so because he would never come back. "Yes," she said. "He deserves to know." She paused. "But I need to know the full picture first, because when I sit down with Ethan Carter, I am not going to show up with half a story and good intentions. I'm going to show up with the truth, all of it, and I'm going to let him decide what to do with it." Marcus nodded. He closed the folder. He stood. "There's one more thing," he said. Something in his tone made her look up. The settlement agreement he signed when he left. Marcus's voice was measured, deliberate. "There's a clause in it. A confidentiality clause, standard boilerplate, but it was written broadly enough that it could be interpreted as preventing him from discussing the terms of his original ownership, his contribution to the company." He paused. "It was written, Victoria, in a way that would have made it very difficult for him to tell anyone who he was." She stared at him. "He couldn't tell people," she said slowly. "Even if he wanted to. Not without significant legal risk." The air in the room felt different, like something that had been compressed for a long time had just been released all at once. "He knew," she said, mostly to herself. "Last night when Mercer said his name, he already knew why it mattered. He knew what the company was built on. He knew what had been taken from him." She stopped. "And he still didn't say anything. He delivered his books," Marcus said quietly. "And then he went home." Victoria put her hands flat on her desk and breathed. She thought about what it would take to carry something like that. To know your name was on the foundation of something enormous, to know that what should have honored your wife's memory had been quietly looted, to know that a confidentiality agreement was sitting between you and the truth, and to choose anyway to just keep building things with your hands. Keep raising your daughter. Keep doing quiet, careful work that nobody applauded. She thought about strength. And she realized she had been confusing strength with power for most of her professional life. Power was what she had. Resources, authority, reach. The ability to walk into a room and reshape it. What Ethan Carter had was different. It was the ability to walk into a room that had already tried to diminish him, pick up his box, and leave with his character entirely intact. That wasn't power. That was something harder to build and impossible to fake.
Shamsha.
The forensic audit team was in the building by noon. By 3 in the afternoon, 2 of the accounting investigators had gone pale in ways that reminded Marcus Webb uncomfortably of Harold Mercer's face the night before. By 5 o'clock, Victoria was in possession of a preliminary summary document that confirmed in careful professional language what she had already understood in her gut at 4 that morning in her kitchen. It was real. 1. The misdirection of funds was real. The systematic undervaluation of Ethan Carter's exit settlement was real. The deliberate dormancy of the Claire Carter Foundation was real. And the people who had orchestrated it, who had looked at a grieving father clutching an infant, and calculated with cold precision that grief was an opportunity, those people were real too. Some of them had been at her gala the night before. Some of them had laughed when she pointed at Ethan Carter and told him to use the service entrance. She thought about that. She let herself think about it fully without managing the emotion or filing it away for later. She had been used. Her ignorance had been useful to people with something to hide. She had stood in that ballroom and performed the exact role they needed her to perform, the unknowing authority figure who reinforced without realizing it the message that this man didn't belong. She had humiliated the founder of her own company in front of 400 people, and they had laughed. She picked up her phone at 5:30 and called Harold Mercer. He answered immediately. He'd been waiting. "We need to talk," she said. "I know," he said. He sounded like a man who had been waiting 16 years for someone to say those exact words in that exact tone. "I'll come to you." "No." She was already putting her coat on. "I'll come to you. And Harold, I need you to help me reach Ethan Carter." A long pause on the line. "Victoria," Mercer said carefully. "When you reach him, how you reach him matters. He's built a life you understand. He made peace with leaving. He's not sitting somewhere waiting for this moment." "I know," she said. "He's going to need to choose whether he wants any part of this. And whatever he chooses, you have to respect it." "I know," she said again. And then more quietly. "Harold, why didn't you do something all those years? You knew who he was. You knew what was built on what he created. Why didn't anyone—" "Because he asked us not to." Mercer's voice broke slightly on the last word, just slightly. "When he left, he said he didn't want the company to follow him. He wanted to be done. He wanted to raise his daughter and be done." A pause. "We honored that, even when honoring it felt wrong." Another pause, heavier this time. "Even when I found out later what they'd done to the foundation. I told myself he'd made his choice. That going after it would only pull him back into something he'd chosen to leave." "But you didn't go after it yourself." The silence that followed was the silence of a man confronting at 73, a choice he made at 60, that he has never fully been able to justify. "No," he said finally. "I didn't." Victoria walked to the elevator. The building was quieting around her, the end-of-day emptying of offices, people heading home to dinners and families and evenings they'd already stopped thinking about at 3 in the afternoon. "I'm going to make this right," she said, "whatever that takes." "Victoria." His voice was old and tired and honest. "The question isn't whether you can make it right. Some things can't be made right. The question is whether you can make it better." He paused. "For the families who should have been helped, for Lily, for Ethan." A breath. "Start there." She stepped into the elevator. "Give me his number, Harold." There was a long pause, and then Mercer gave it to her. She wrote it in her phone with hands that were not entirely steady. The elevator descended. Outside, the city was doing what cities do in the early evening, the particular energy of 6 million people shifting from their working selves to their private selves. The streets filling with people heading somewhere that mattered to them personally rather than professionally. As somewhere across this city, A man with calloused hands had probably already started dinner. Was probably listening to his 10-year-old daughter talk about her day the way parents do when the day has been hard, and the sound of your kid's voice is the only thing that makes it navigable. Victoria stood on the sidewalk outside her building and looked at the number in her phone. She thought about what she was going to say. She thought about the foundation, about Claire Carter, about research programs that had died because powerful people decided a grieving father's conditions could be quietly ignored. She thought about what it meant that this man had shown up at her party to deliver something beautiful that he'd made with his own hands, and she had looked at him and seen nothing worth paying attention to. She pressed call. It rang twice. Then a voice measured calm, slightly surprised, said, "Hello?" And Victoria Langford, who had faced hostile boardrooms and brutal negotiations and the kind of professional crises that flatten lesser executives, took a breath. "Mr. Carter," she said. "My name is Victoria Langford. I was the woman at the gala last night, and I need to talk to you, not about the company, not about the past." She stopped. "About the truth. About what was done to your wife's foundation." Silence on the other end. Not the silence of shock. The silence of someone who has been waiting without knowing they were waiting for a specific sentence. For the specific confirmation that someone finally had looked at the right files and understood what they found. "Mr. Carter," she said. "I'm here," he said. His voice was quiet. Still. The same voice he'd used in the ballroom when she demanded he leave. The same voice that had said, "You owe me a coordinator," with the composure of a man who had long ago decided what he was and what he wasn't, and no one else's judgment was going to change it. "I know," he said. 2 words. "I know." Meke. Victoria stood on the sidewalk with the phone pressed to her ear, and she understood in the full weight of that moment that Ethan Carter had known about the foundation for years. Had known what was taken from him from Claire's memory from the families that funding was supposed to reach. And he had carried it alone. Because that was what he did. Because there was no one else to carry it with him. "Can we meet?" she said. Another pause. Then in the background, she heard a small voice, young, clear, matter-of-fact, say, "Dad, the pasta's boiling over." And Ethan Carter said away from the phone quietly and immediately, "I got it, Bug, 1 second." And then back to her, "Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock, I'll send you an address." "Thank you," Victoria said. "Don't thank me yet," he said, not unkindly, just honestly. "We haven't said the hard things yet." He hung up. Victoria lowered her phone. Around her, the city kept moving. Indifferent. Enormous. Full of people carrying things that nobody else could see. She started walking. Tomorrow at 8 o'clock, she was going to sit across from the man she'd publicly humiliated, and she was going to tell him everything she knew. And then, she was going to listen, really listen the way she had apparently not been listening for years, to whatever he decided to say. She didn't know what he would ask for. She didn't know what justice looked like from where he was standing. But she knew one thing with a certainty she hadn't felt about anything in a very long time. Whatever he asked for, he had earned it. Every single word of it. Ethan's workshop smelled like leather and wood glue, and something older than both the particular scent of a place where a person has spent years doing quiet, careful work that nobody ever applauded. Victoria arrived at 7:58. Yea, she had dressed down deliberately. No power suit, no statement jewelry, just a dark coat and flat shoes, and the particular vulnerability of a woman who had decided somewhere between her apartment and this address that she was not going to walk into this room as a CEO. She was going to walk in as someone who owed a debt, and had finally come to acknowledge it. She knocked. Ethan opened the door after a moment. He was in a plain shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, a coffee mug in one hand. He looked at her the way he'd looked at her in the ballroom, that same measured, calibrated assessment. But without the crowd, without the chandeliers, without 400 people watching, it felt completely different. It felt honest. "You found it okay," he said. "Yes." She looked around briefly at the workshop visible behind him, the workbenches, the tools, the organized rows of materials. Then she looked back at him. "Thank you for agreeing to this." "Come in," he said, not warmly, not coldly, just directly. She came in. He poured her a coffee without asking and set it on the work table. He sat on one stool and gestured at another. She sat. Between them was a half-finished book binding something he'd been working on before she arrived, something he hadn't bothered to put away. She appreciated that. It meant he wasn't performing composure for her benefit. The work was just part of the room, part of him, the same way breathing is. "Where's your daughter?" Victoria asked. "School," he said. "She goes in at 8. "Right." Victoria wrapped both hands around the coffee mug. "I want to start by saying something before we get into any of the specifics. And I need you to know I mean this without any corporate language attached to it." She paused. "What I did to you at that gala was wrong, not just incorrect. Wrong. I looked at you, and I made a decision about who you were based on what you were carrying. I did not ask a single question. I just performed authority in front of people who were watching." She stopped. "I've done a lot of things in my career that I'm not proud of, but that one I've thought about every hour since it happened." Ethan looked at her steadily. "I've been carrying boxes into rooms for 15 years, he said. "People see what they want to see. That's not an excuse." "I didn't say it was." He took a sip of his coffee. "I said it happens." She nodded. She opened her bag and placed a folder on the work table, not pushing it toward him, just placing it the way Marcus Webb had placed the folder in front of her, letting it be there. "I had my legal team and a forensic audit group in the files from yesterday morning," she said. "I want to tell you what we found, and then I want you to talk. And I'm going to listen. That's it. That's the whole meeting." Ethan looked at the folder. His expression didn't change. But something behind his eyes moved like a shift in weight, barely visible, but real. "Okay," he said. She told him. She told him about the foundation funding that stopped within a year of his departure. She told him about the expense account transfers. She told him about the exit settlement that had been structured with what now appeared to be deliberate intent to give him significantly less than the value of what he had built and owned. She told him about the confidentiality clause that had been written broadly enough to function effectively as a gag on his own story. She told him all of it. She did not soften it. She did not manage it. She read his face the whole time, and she watched something happen that she hadn't expected. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look vindicated. He looked tired. Not the tired of a man hearing bad news. The tired of a man who has been right about something painful for a very long time, and the confirmation of being right brings no satisfaction whatsoever, because what he was right about cost him something that can never be recovered. When she finished, the workshop was quiet, except for a car passing on the street outside. "The foundation," Ethan said finally. His voice was even. "The Claire Carter Foundation. Are you telling me that in 13 years not a single dollar went to the research programs?" "Not after the first 3 years, no." He set his coffee mug down. He put his hands flat on the work table. He was quiet for a long moment, and Victoria, who had been in rooms with powerful people her entire career, who had learned to read silence like a second language, did not say anything. She let the silence be his. "She died on a Tuesday morning," Ethan said. Not to Victoria specifically, more to the space in front of him. "Claire. She was making breakfast. Lily was 4 months old, still sleeping. I heard something hit the floor." He stopped. He breathed. "The doctors called it a sudden cardiac arrhythmia. They said it was a structural anomaly she'd probably had her whole life without knowing. They said early detection screenings can catch these things, that there are intervention protocols that work if you catch it in time." Another pause. "She didn't get caught in time, So I needed the foundation to exist so that other people's wives, other people's husbands, other people's parents might get caught in time. It was the only thing that made any sense out of what happened. Victoria didn't trust herself to speak. That was the condition, Ethan continued. I didn't ask for much. I knew the company needed capital. I was willing to be flexible on almost everything, but not that. The foundation wasn't negotiable. I made that clear. They agreed, in writing. He looked at Victoria directly. And then I left because I had a 4-month-old daughter who needed her father, and I couldn't be in that building anymore without thinking about Claire everywhere. And I trusted them. He stopped on the last word, and trusted them. Victoria felt it land the way it was meant to land, not as accusation. Ethan Carter was not an accusatory man, but as a simple statement of what had been and what had been betrayed. How long have you known, she asked, that the foundation went dormant? He exhaled. About 8 years ago. A researcher I'd been in contact with reached out. She'd been running one of the programs. She told me the funding had stopped. Told me she'd tried to find out why and hit a wall. His jaw tightened slightly. I looked into it as much as I could, but the confidentiality clause... He stopped. My lawyer at the time told me pursuing it would mean a legal fight. I probably couldn't win against a company with 100 times the resources I had. And a fight like that going on for years. What does that do to Lily? What does it do to me, trying to raise her? He shook his head. I made a choice. I told myself I'd find another way to honor Claire. I built the workshop. I did the work. I kept moving. He looked at his hands. But I never stopped knowing, he said quietly, that somewhere somebody was living in a house that should have been Claire's foundation, driving a car that should have been a research program. His voice dropped lower. That people probably died who didn't have to. The last sentence fell into the room like something heavy dropped from height. Victoria said nothing for a long moment. Then, Ethan, I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to answer it honestly, even if the answer is none of my business. He looked at her. The settlement you took when you left the amount they gave you. Was it enough to live, to raise Lily? Did you struggle financially because of what they did? Something moved across his face, not quite a smile. Something more complicated. We were okay, he said. I was always good with money. Built the workshop with what I had. Grew it slowly. We're not wealthy. He glanced around the space. But Lily's never gone without. She's never known anything was missing. A pause. What was missing was for the families who needed that foundation, not for us. Victoria nodded. She picked up the folder. She held it for a moment without opening it. I want to propose something, she said. And I want to be clear that this is not the company offering you something to make a problem go away. This is me personally telling you what I believe is right and asking you what you want to do with it. Ethan waited. We have enough documentation to bring formal fraud charges against at least 3 individuals who were involved in redirecting the foundation funds. The forensic team is still working, and that number may grow. She put the folder down. The board will convene an emergency session. The choice in front of us is how public this gets, how it gets handled, and what the outcome looks like. She met his eyes. None of that should be decided without you. This is your story. This is Claire's foundation. You get to say what happens next. Ethan was quiet for a moment that felt much longer than it was. What are the people who did this going to say? He asked. Right now, nothing. They don't know how much we have yet. And when they do know, they'll lawyer up, she said honestly. Immediately. And they'll try to characterize it as accounting irregularities, mismanagement, anything that stops the word fraud from attaching to their names. And can you stop them from doing that? Not entirely. She paused. But the documentation is very clear, and the forensic team is very good. and I will personally stand in front of every relevant authority and tell the truth about what was found. A beat. I should have been doing that for years, even though I didn't know. The company's leadership failed you. I am the company's leadership now. That means something. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Why are you doing this? He asked, not suspiciously. Genuinely curious the way a man asks a question when he actually wants the answer. Victoria thought about lying. Not a big lie, just the professional reflex toward diplomatic non-answer, toward framing and positioning. The habit of 20 years in corporate leadership. She didn't do it. Because I pointed at you in front of 400 people, she said, and the room laughed, and I let them laugh. And I didn't know who you were, but that actually doesn't matter as much as I've been telling myself it does. Because you shouldn't have to be the founder of a billion-dollar company to be treated like a human being in a room. She stopped. And because the morning after when I started reading those files, I found a woman named Claire, and I found a foundation her husband built in her memory, and I found what people did to it. She pressed her lips together. I have never in my life hated the institution I work for, not until yesterday morning. Ethan looked at the half-finished book binding on the table between them. He picked it up, not doing anything with it, just holding it the way people hold familiar objects when they're thinking through something difficult. I don't want revenge, he said. I know. I don't want the company back. I don't want a title. I don't want a check with a lot of zeros that's supposed to make everyone feel better about what happened. I know, she said again, what I want. He set the book binding down. He looked at her directly, and there was something in his eyes that Victoria recognized finally for what it was. Not hardness, not anger. Something much more durable than either of those things. Conviction. The particular kind that survives grief and years of quiet and being overlooked and still comes out the other side knowing what it is. What I want is for the foundation to be real, not a check to an existing fund somewhere, not a donation in Claire's name on a plaque somewhere. A real foundation, properly funded, independently governed with researchers who can actually do the work. And I want it publicly acknowledged that it was taken from her, from the people it was supposed to help. He paused. They deserve to know why those programs stopped. The families who were waiting for that research. They deserve the truth. Victoria nodded slowly. And the people who did it, Ethan continued. I don't need to see them destroyed, but I need them to be accountable. I need there to be a record. I need it to not be the kind of thing that gets quietly settled with NDAs, and nobody ever says out loud what actually happened. That might mean a very public fight, Victoria said carefully. They will push back. I know. His voice was steady. I've been carrying this alone for 8 years. If there's going to be a fight now, at least it'll be in the open. Victoria looked at him. She thought about all the ways this could go. The legal complexity, the board dynamics, the PR exposure, the people who were going to make this as difficult as possible because they had the resources and the lawyers and the particular ruthlessness of the cornered powerful. She thought about all of it, and then she thought about a woman making breakfast on a Tuesday morning who never got the chance to see her daughter grow up. And she made her decision. Okay, she said, here's what's going to happen. I'm calling the board into emergency session today, not next week today. I'm going to present everything the forensic team found, and I'm going to tell them that you have been made aware of the situation, and that the company's response is going to be determined by what you want, not by what's convenient for the institution. She paused. Some of them are going to fight this. Some of them were part of it, Ethan said quietly. Her jaw tightened. Yes, and those individuals will be removed from the board pending the outcome of the investigation. That is non-negotiable. Something shifted in Ethan's expression, not quite surprise but adjacent to it, like a man recalibrating an expectation. You're not afraid of them, he said. I'm terrified of them, she said. I'm doing it anyway. For the first time since she'd walked through the door, Something changed in Ethan Carter's face. Something relaxed just slightly, just enough like a muscle that had been held in tension for a very long time, allowing itself with great caution to rest. "Harold said you were formidable," he said. "Harold's been known to be generous. He also said you don't back down when you know you're right. He's been known to be accurate." A beat of silence, different from the earlier silences. This one had something almost collaborative in it, the silence of two people who have just decided tentatively that they might be on the same side of something. "There's one thing I need from you," Victoria said. He waited. "I need you to come to the board meeting." She held his gaze. Not to fight, not to perform, just to be in the room. Because the people in that room have been able to tell themselves for 15 years that what they did was fine because you left voluntarily, because you made a choice and you moved on and nobody was holding them accountable. She paused. They need to see you. They need to understand that you're real, that Claire was real, that what they took wasn't abstract. Ethan said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "When?" "Thursday, 2 days from now." He looked at his hands again, the calloused, practiced hands of a man who had spent 15 years making beautiful things in a quiet room. "I'll need to arrange something for Lily after school," he said. "Of course." He looked up. "Thursday." "Thursday," she confirmed. She stood. She picked up her bag. She looked around the workshop one more time at the tools, the materials, the careful order of a space built by someone who understands that the quality of your environment reflects the quality of your attention. "Can I ask you something?" she said. He nodded. "The books you delivered, the commemorative books for the anniversary." She paused. "Did you know it was our company when you took the order?" He met her eyes. "Yes," he said. She absorbed that. "And you made them anyway. You put weeks into them." "I made a commitment," he said simply. "The work doesn't change because of who it's for. The work is the work." Victoria stood there for a moment with that sentence. The work is the work. Yao. She thought about everything the company had been built on. The technology, the platform, the 15 years of growth and acquisition and market domination. All of it built on a foundation that a man in a quiet workshop had created late at night, because he believed in what he was making. All of it, and he had still shown up to deliver 12 handcrafted books because he made a commitment, and the work mattered regardless of who it was for. She felt something she rarely felt. Small. Not humiliated, not diminished. Small in the way you feel small when you're standing next to something that has more integrity than you've been operating with, and you know it, and the knowing is uncomfortable, but also strangely clarifying. "I'll see you Thursday," she said. "Thursday," he said. She walked to the door. She opened it. The morning outside was ordinary, just a street, just a city, just the world doing what it does. She stopped. "Ethan." She didn't turn around fully, just partially. For what it's worth, the books were extraordinary. Everyone who received one said so. They said they'd never seen anything made with that kind of care. She paused. "I think that says something." She heard him behind her. "Tell them they're worth caring for," he said. "That's all." She walked out. She sat in her car outside the workshop for 3 minutes before she started the engine. Not crying. Victoria Langford did not cry before 9 a.m. It was a personal policy, but close enough to it that she needed the 3 minutes before she could be a CEO again. She called Marcus Webb. "Get the board on the phone," she said when he picked up. "All of them. Today." And Marcus, a breath. "Pull the personnel files for Raymond Holt, Peter Staines, and Gerald Marsh." 3 names. 3 members of the original executive team who had been in the documents, whose names appeared near the expense account transfers, who had been at the gala 2 nights ago. "I want everything." A pause on Marcus's end. "Victoria, if you're doing what I think you're doing, "Get me the files, Marcus." A beat. "Yes," he said. "Okay, yes." She started the engine. She pulled out into the street and drove toward the building that had been built on what Ethan Carter made through 16 years of people who forgot to say his name. She was going to say it now, loudly, on the record, with documentation. And she was going to make sure that on Thursday morning, when Ethan Carter walked into a boardroom for the first time in 15 years, the people in that room understood exactly what they had done. Not to a founder, not to a shareholder, not to a legal agreement. To a father who lost his wife on a Tuesday morning and asked for nothing except that her death means something. That was who they had stolen from. And they were going to have to sit across from him and answer for it. Every single one of them. Thursday came faster than anyone was ready for. Victoria had spent the 2 days between her visit to Ethan's workshop and the board meeting in a state of controlled intensity that her assistant described later privately as the most focused she had ever seen anyone in her life. Every meeting was cleared except the ones that mattered. Every conversation was precise. Every decision moved in one direction. Marcus Webb had pulled the personnel files on Raymond Holt, Peter Staines, and Gerald Marsh within 3 hours of her phone call from the car outside the workshop. What those files contained, cross-referenced against the forensic audit findings, against the foundation records, against the expense account transfers, built a picture so clear and so deliberate that even Marcus, who had spent 30 years in corporate law and believed he had seen every variation of institutional dishonesty, sat back in his chair and said nothing for almost a full minute. "How long did they think they could keep this buried?" he finally said. "Forever," Victoria said. "They thought he was never coming back." Raymond Holt had been with the company since the beginning. He was 68 years old, silver-haired, and had the particular manner of a man who had spent decades being treated as indispensable. He sat on 3 charitable boards. He gave speeches about ethical leadership at industry conferences. He had a named scholarship at his alma mater. He was also the primary architect of the expense account structure that had absorbed over 13 years the funds designated for the Claire Carter Foundation. Peter Staines had handled the legal documentation, specifically the exit agreement that had been written to limit Ethan's ability to discuss his own contributions, and the settlement structure that had been calculated to pay him as little as the company could legally defend. But Gerald Marsh had been the CFO during the transition years. He had signed off on the accounting reclassifications that made the foundation's missing funds look on paper like routine operational adjustments. 3 men. 3 specific roles. 13 years of silence maintained because they had collectively decided that a grieving father who wanted to raise his daughter in peace would never come back to ask questions. They had been wrong. And now it was Thursday morning. The board meeting was scheduled for 9 o'clock in the large conference room on the 32nd floor. 12 board members, the company's general counsel, the forensic audit team lead, Marcus Webb, and Victoria. Ethan had been asked to wait in a smaller conference room down the hall until Victoria sent for him. He'd arrived at 8:45. He was wearing the same dark suit from the gala, clean, pressed quiet. He had a cup of coffee he wasn't drinking, and a stillness about him that Victoria noticed when she stopped in briefly before the meeting started. "You okay?" she asked. "I've been okay for 15 years, he said. "This isn't the hard part." She looked at him. What was the hard part? He looked at the untouched coffee. The Tuesday morning. Everything after that was just figuring out how to keep moving. She nodded. She didn't say anything else. There was nothing to say that wouldn't diminish what he'd just said. And she had learned over the past 48 hours that the most respectful thing she could offer Ethan Carter was to not fill silences that didn't need filling. "I'll come get you," she said. "Give me an hour." He nodded. She walked down the hall toward the boardroom. She was about to walk through the door when her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. It read, "You should think very carefully about what you're doing today. Some things are better left where they are. This does not have to get ugly." She stared at it for 3 seconds. Did she? Then she screenshot it, forwarded it to Marcus with the message added to the file, and pushed open the boardroom door. Raymond Holt was already seated. So were Staines and Marsh. All three of them were at the far end of the table, and all three had the careful assembled expressions of people who knew something was coming and had spent the past 48 hours deciding how to handle it. Their lawyers, three of them seated against the wall behind their clients, had the quieter, more predatory expression of people who were being paid to make this difficult. Victoria counted that. 3 lawyers already in the room. They'd known long enough to lawyer up, which meant someone had told them, which meant someone on her team had spoken to them. She filed that away and kept walking. She sat at the head of the table. She looked at the assembled board, at the 9 members who had no involvement in what the forensic team had found, who were here to understand what had happened and decide what the company would do about it, and at the 3 who were here because they had no choice, and she said without preamble, "We're going to talk about the Origin Engine, about the Claire Carter Foundation, and about what happened to both of them." Raymond Holt spoke immediately. His voice was smooth and controlled, the voice of a man who had been the most commanding person in most rooms for most of his life. "Victoria, I want to caution against framing today's meeting around unverified allegations. The forensic process is ongoing and making assertions before Raymond." She said his name the way you say a name when you want someone to understand that their usual tactics are not going to work today. "The forensic process produced a preliminary report. That report is in front of every person in this room. I've read it. Our general counsel has read it. The independent audit team has reviewed it." She paused. "You're welcome to tell me which part of it is unverified." Holt's jaw tightened. "The accounting reclassifications in question were reviewed at the time by Gerald Marsh," Victoria said, "who is also in this room, who also has a lawyer seated behind him." She looked at Marsh directly. "Gerald, do you want to explain the reclassifications? Because I've read the documentation and I'd like to hear it in your words." Marsh looked at his lawyer. His lawyer put a hand on his arm. "Mr. Marsh has been advised not to comment on specific financial decisions pending a full review," the lawyer said. "I'm sure he has," Victoria said. She opened the folder in front of her. She did not rush. She was very deliberate about not rushing because she wanted every person in that room to understand that she was not reactive today. She was prepared. "I'm going to summarize what the forensic team found," she said. "And then I'm going to bring someone into this room. And then this board is going to make a decision about how this company moves forward." She looked around the table. "For the 9 of you who had no knowledge of what I'm about to describe, I want you to know that I believe that. I want you to understand that today is not about your judgment. It's about the institutions and what we're going to do with what we know." She paused. "For the other 3, I want you to know that this is your last opportunity to get ahead of this. Because what I do with what we've found after this meeting depends entirely on whether this board demonstrates genuine accountability, or whether it demonstrates that it intends to protect people who do not deserve protection." One of the uninvolved board members, a woman named Sandra Okafor, who had joined the board 4 years ago, and who Victoria had always found to be the most intellectually honest person in the room, leaned forward. "Victoria, who are we bringing in?" "The man who built the Origin Engine," Victoria said. The silence that followed was a different quality from the silence at the gala. This one was comprehension rather than shock. Several of the board members who hadn't known looked at each other, then looked at Holt, and something shifted in the room's atmosphere. The particular shift that happens when people who thought they understood the shape of a situation realize they have been looking at only part of it. "Ethan Carter," Sandra said, not a question. "Yes." "He's here. He's down the hall." Sandra sat back. She was looking at Holt now, looking at him with the expression of someone doing arithmetic and not liking the answer. "Raymond," she said quietly, "what did you do?" Holt said nothing. His lawyer started to speak. Sandra raised a hand, a small, precise gesture, and the lawyer stopped. "I'm asking Raymond," she said. "Not his lawyer. His." Holt looked at Sandra. He looked at Victoria. He looked at the folder in front of him that he hadn't opened the folder. Every person in the room had been given the folder that contained in clean professional language the detailed account of what he had done over 13 years. "The company made difficult decisions during a difficult transition period," he said. His voice was still controlled, but the room temperature had changed. "Resource allocation decisions that in retrospect may warrant—" "Raymond," Sandra's voice was quiet and final. "Claire Carter was a real person. Her foundation was a contractual obligation. You redirected the money into accounts that benefited you personally." She had read the folder. Every page. Sandra Okafor always read everything. "Don't sit in this room and call that a resource allocation decision." And the crack in Holt's composure was small, but it was visible. Just a tightening around the eyes, a slight change in how he was holding his jaw. The first sign that the architecture of 15 years of careful positioning was developing a fracture. Staines shifted in his seat. The confidentiality agreement was standard boilerplate. "It wasn't," Marcus Webb said from his seat beside Victoria. It was the first time he'd spoken. His voice was completely neutral, the way his voice got when he was most serious. "I've reviewed the original drafts against the executed version. There are 17 specific modifications in the executed version that do not appear in the template documents from that period. Those modifications were targeted, they were deliberate, and they functioned specifically to prevent Ethan Carter from discussing the nature and extent of his foundational contribution to this company." He paused. "That is not standard boilerplate, Peter. You know that. You wrote most of it." Staines looked at his hands. Victoria stood. "I'm going to get Ethan," she said. "And I want every person in this room to understand something before he walks through that door. He is not here for revenge. He is not here to reclaim the company. He is not here to make anyone's life difficult." She looked at Holt, at Staines, at Marsh. "He is here because he deserves to be in this room. Because his wife's name is on a foundation that was stolen from her memory. And because this board, this company owes him the truth spoken out loud, in person with witnesses." She walked to the door. "You have 3 minutes." She walked down the hall. She knocked on the small conference room door and opened it. Ethan was standing by the window, not looking out of it, just standing near it the way people stand near windows when they're thinking, and the window gives them somewhere to put their eyes that isn't another person's face. He turned when she came in. "It's time," she said. He picked up his jacket from the chair. He put it on. He looked at her. "Are they going to fight?" he asked. "Holt is trying to. The other two are quieter. I think Staines might be close to breaking." Ethan nodded slowly. "What do you need from me in there?" "Nothing," she said. "Just be yourself. Just say whatever you need to say, or say nothing. The documentation does most of the work." She paused. "But your presence matters." "I meant what I said about that." He looked at her for a moment. "Victoria, after this, whatever happens in there, I want you to know something." She waited. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "You found those files and you could have managed it, settled it quietly, minimized exposure. I know how this works. I've seen how this works. A lot of people in your position would have found a way to make this disappear and convinced themselves they'd done the right thing." He paused. "You didn't." "It wasn't right," she said simply. "A lot of things aren't right," he said. "Not everyone cares." She held his gaze. "I care." He nodded once, and then he walked to the door and held it open for her. She walked through first. They walked down the hall together. When Victoria opened the boardroom door and Ethan Carter walked through it for the first time in 15 years, the room went completely still. He was not dramatic about his entrance. He didn't stop in the doorway or survey the room or perform the gravity of the moment. He simply walked in, the way he did everything straightforward, quiet, present, and he pulled out a chair at the side of the table, not the head, and he sat down. Raymond Holt looked at him, and for the first time in the entire proceeding, the composure that had defined Holt's entire professional life, the expensive composure of a man who had learned to manage every room he walked into, faltered. Because Ethan Carter was not what he'd expected, not angry, not damaged, not broken by 15 years of carrying something alone. He was just a man in a dark suit with calloused hands and steady eyes sitting in a chair being present. London, which was somehow worse than any of the things Holt had prepared for. Ethan looked at Holt, then at Staines, then at Marsh. He looked at each of them long enough that there was no ambiguity about the fact that he saw them, really saw them, and then he looked at the rest of the table. "My name is Ethan Carter," he said. "Most of you already know that now. 16 years ago, I built the system this company runs on. I did it because I believed in what it could become. I left because my wife died and I needed to be a father." He paused. "Those are the facts. The rest of what's in those folders is also facts. I'm not here to argue about them." He looked at Holt again. "I'm here because there are families, real families, with real people in them who should have had access to research and screening programs that a foundation was contractually obligated to fund. And those families didn't get that. And some of those people are probably dead who didn't have to be." He let that sit in the room. "I don't know how many. I've thought about that number for 8 years and I don't know it. But it's not zero." The room was very quiet. "So here's what I'm asking for," Ethan continued. "Not what I'm demanding, what I'm asking. Fund the foundation, fully, retroactively calculate what should have gone in over 13 years and put it in. Get it operational, get the research programs running again, and make it public why it stopped and why it's starting again." He paused. "That's it. That's all I want." Holt found his voice. It was thinner than before. "Ethan, I think if we could discuss this privately." "No," Ethan said, simply, without heat. "There's been enough private discussion. That's how we got here." Sandra Okafor spoke from across the table. Her voice was careful and direct. "Mr. Carter, on behalf of the board members who had no knowledge of these events, I want to say clearly that what was done was wrong, not inadequate, not mismanaged, wrong." She looked at Holt. "And I want it on the record that this board will not protect individuals whose conduct has damaged both this company and the people it was supposed to serve." Holt's lawyer started to object. Sandra looked at the lawyer. "You're here as a courtesy," she said. "Don't." The lawyer sat back. Yen Victoria was watching Ethan's face. She saw the moment Sandra's words landed, the moment someone in institutional authority said clearly and without hedging what was done was wrong. She watched something happen in his expression. Not relief exactly. Something more elemental than relief. The particular release of a person who has been holding something very heavy for a very long time, and someone has finally walked up and said, "I see what you're carrying. I believe you. You can set it down now." He didn't cry. Ethan Carter was not a man who cried in boardrooms. But his jaw moved once, and he looked down at the table for a moment, before he looked back up. It was the most human thing Victoria had seen in 20 years of professional life. Then Peter Staines did something nobody in the room expected. He stood up. His lawyer grabbed his arm. He shook it off. "I need to say something," Staines said. His voice was not controlled. It was the voice of a man who had been holding something in a very tight grip for 15 years and had just run out of strength. I need to say something directly to you." He was looking at Ethan. "I wrote that agreement. I knew what I was writing and what it would do, and I did it anyway because I thought—" He stopped, swallowed. "I told myself you wanted to be left alone, that it was better for you if it was clean. But that wasn't true, and I knew it wasn't true, and I—" He stopped again. His lawyer was pulling at his sleeve. He looked at his lawyer with the expression of a man who has just decided that what his lawyer thinks doesn't matter anymore. "I'm sorry," he said to Ethan. "I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need to say it in this room with these people listening." The silence that followed was absolute. Ethan looked at Staines for a long moment. "Okay," he said. Not, "It's fine." Not, "I forgive you." Just okay. Acknowledgement. Receipt. The quiet completion of a circuit that had been open for 15 years. Staines sat back down. His hands were shaking. Holt looked at Staines with an expression that could have stripped paint. Then Holt looked back at Ethan. And something shifted in Holt's face. Not remorse, not exactly, but the particular expression of a man who has just understood that the story he has been telling about himself for 15 years is no longer the one that other people are going to tell about him. That the version of events he had managed and maintained and protected with expensive lawyers and careful accounting was over. "What do you want from me?" Holt said. His voice was very quiet. Ethan looked at him. "I want you to fund the foundation," he said, "personally, as part of whatever the board decides to hold you accountable for. I want your name nowhere near it, not as a donor, not as a patron, nothing, but I want the money there." He paused. "And I want you to stop sitting on charitable boards. I want you to stop giving speeches about ethical leadership, because the people in those audiences deserve better than someone who uses good words to cover what he actually did." Holt said nothing. His lawyer said nothing. The room said nothing. And in the silence, Sandra Okafor called for a formal vote on 4 resolutions. Immediate suspension of Raymond Holt, Peter Staines, and Gerald Marsh from all board activities, pending full investigation. Commissioning of an independent legal review of all founding-era agreements. Full restoration and endowment of the Claire Carter Foundation with a transparent public accounting. And a formal company statement acknowledging the historical error. 12 votes, 9 board members not involved plus Victoria Marcus and the General Counsel in a consultative capacity. The vote was unanimous. Holt sat in his chair and did not move while it happened. After the vote, the 3 suspended board members and their lawyers were escorted out, not dramatically, not with security, just quietly, the way things end when there is nothing left to fight about, because the fight has already been decided. When they were gone, the room exhaled. Sandra looked at Ethan. "The foundation, do you want to be involved in governing it?" Ethan shook his head. "I want it independent. Researchers, medical professionals, people who know the work." He paused. "But I'd like to name one board seat. Someone who actually knew Claire. Someone who'll remember what it's for." "Done," Sandra said. Victoria looked at Ethan from across the table. He looked back at her. She thought about a gala, about a man with a box and a quiet face, about a room that laughed, about the particular terrible efficiency of a world that decides what a person is worth before they've said a single word. She thought about what it cost to carry 15 years of something like this and come out the other side still making beautiful things with your hands and leaving the porch light on for your daughter. "Ethan," she said, "thank you for coming." He looked at her for a moment with those steady, impossible-to-rattle eyes. "Tell Harold it went well," he said. "He'll want to know." He stood. He shook Sandra Okafor's hand. He nodded at the remaining board members. He picked up his jacket. And then Ethan Carter walked out of the boardroom and down the hallway and through the lobby of the building he had built the foundation for and through the glass doors and out into the morning. He had a commission due by Friday. He had a daughter to pick up from school at 3. He had work to do, so he went and did it. The company's public statement went out on a Monday morning, 6 days after the board meeting. Victoria had written 7 drafts before settling on the final version. Not because she couldn't find the right words. She had always been precise with language, but because every draft she wrote kept trying to soften something that didn't deserve softening. Every draft kept reaching for the kind of corporate phrasing that lets institutions acknowledge wrongdoing, while simultaneously creating just enough distance from it that nobody feels the full weight of what was said. She deleted every one of those drafts. The final statement was 4 paragraphs. Plain language, no passive voice, no mistakes were made. It named what happened. It named the foundation. It named Claire Carter. It named the 13 years. It said the company had failed a commitment it was legally and morally obligated to keep, and that the individuals responsible had been removed from their positions pending formal legal proceedings. It did not name Ethan Carter because he had asked her not to. "This isn't about me," he'd said when she called to read him the draft the night before it went out. "It's about the foundation, about the families. Put the focus there." "People are going to find out anyway," she said. "The story is already moving." "Let it move," he said. "I don't need my name in the press release." She had argued for 30 seconds, and then stopped, because she recognized in the particular quality of his calm that this wasn't stubbornness. It was the same principle he applied to everything. The work is the work. The point of the statement was the foundation, not the drama around it, not the narrative arc, the thing that needed to be fixed. She kept his name out. The statement ran on a Monday. By Tuesday afternoon, it had been picked up by 17 industry publications and 4 national outlets. By Wednesday morning, it was a lead story on 2 major business news networks. By Wednesday evening, the story had found its shape, not through the company's statement, which was careful and factual, but through Harold Mercer, who gave a brief interview to a journalist he had known for 30 years, and who said, with the directness of a 73-year-old man who had run out of patience for indirectness, "The man who built this company spent 15 years making handcrafted books in a workshop, while the people who benefited from his work told themselves he'd chosen to disappear. He didn't disappear. They just stopped looking." Ethan. That quote traveled faster than anything the company's communications team had prepared for. By Thursday, Ethan's phone had rung 11 times from numbers he didn't recognize. He let them all go to voicemail. He listened to 2 of them, a journalist and a producer from a morning television program, and then he put his phone face down on the workbench and finished the binding he was working on because the binding was due Friday and his feelings about media attention were not going to change that. Lily found him at the workbench that evening when she got home from school. She was 10 years old, and she had her father's eyes and her mother's way of standing in a doorway, like she was deciding whether the room deserved her full attention yet. She stood in the doorway of the workshop and looked at him. "Dad," she said. "Kira's mom told Kira's dad who told Kira that you're on the internet." Ethan looked up from the binding. "What?" "She said you built some big company, and they were mean to you, and now it's a whole thing." She tilted her head. "Is that true?" He set down his tools. He looked at his daughter. Really looked at her the way he did when a conversation required his full attention, and not just the part of his attention that could be managed while his hands kept working. "Come sit down," he said. She came in and sat on the stool across from him. The same stool Victoria Langford had sat on 9 days ago, and she looked at him with the particular focused attention of a child who knows something real is about to be said and wants to make sure she catches all of it. He told her. Not everything she was 10, and some of the financial and legal specifics were not 10 years old information, but the shape of it. He told her about the company he had helped build a long time ago before she was born. He told her about the foundation he had created in her mother's name and what it was supposed to do. He told her that the foundation had been taken from its purpose for many years, but that it was being restored now. He told her carefully, watching her face the way he always watched her face when he was saying something that mattered. Lily was quiet for a moment when he finished. Then she said, "The foundation was for people like Mom, so they wouldn't die the way she did." "Yes," he said. "And they stopped it." For a long time, yes. She thought about that. He watched her think about it, the particular working through of a 10-year-old with a serious mind processing something that deserved seriousness. But it's going to run now, she said. Yes. With real money, real research. Yes. She nodded slowly. And then she said something that Ethan wasn't prepared for, the way he was rarely prepared for the things Lily said, because she had a way of arriving at the center of things, through a route nobody else thought to take. So Mom's name is going to mean something, she said. That's what you wanted. He looked at his daughter. He felt something move through his chest that he didn't have a word for, something that was grief and love and 15 years of carrying, and the particular disorienting feeling of being truly seen by a 10-year-old who shared your eyes and her mother's way of standing in doorways. Yeah, he said. His voice was steady. He made sure it was steady. That's what I wanted. Lily looked at him for another moment. Then she said, with the practical pivot of a child who understands that some things are too big to sit with for too long before you need to move forward. Are we going to be on TV? He almost laughed. No. Good, she said. I don't want to be on TV. She slid off the stool. I'm going to make dinner. Don't stay in here too late. I won't. She walked to the door. She stopped. She didn't turn around, just set it to the doorframe. Dad, Mom would have liked that you fought for it. She went inside. Ethan sat in his workshop in the quiet and didn't move for a while. Buddy, he thought about Claire. The way she used to say, what's the point of building something if you build it small? The way she said it, not as a grand declaration, but as a practical observation, the way she said most things, clear-eyed, direct, without ceremony. She had been the least sentimental person he'd ever known, which made her love the more remarkable, because when she gave it, she meant every single word. He thought about what she would have said if she could see the past 2 weeks. He thought she would have told him to stop sitting in the workshop and go eat dinner. So he did. The formal legal proceedings against Raymond Holt, Peter Staines, and Gerald Marsh began the following week. Victoria had retained outside counsel specifically to avoid any appearance of the company managing the outcome, and the case was referred to the State Attorney General's office, which opened a formal investigation within 72 hours of receiving the forensic audit documentation. Holt's lawyers issued a statement characterizing the allegations as the result of a fundamental misunderstanding of complex accounting practices. The statement was 3 paragraphs of careful language that said nothing and meant less. The journalist who had spoken to Harold Mercer published a follow-up piece the same day, citing the specific document trail the forensic team had assembled, and the careful language collapsed almost immediately under the weight of the specifics. Yet Staines did not issue a statement. His lawyer did. It said his client was cooperating fully with all relevant authorities, which in legal language means he had decided that cooperation was a better strategy than resistance, which meant he had already begun to talk. Marsh retained a new lawyer. His old one resigned from the case without explanation, which was explanation enough. Victoria watched all of it from a careful distance. She was not the investigator. She was not the prosecutor. Her job, as she had defined it to herself, was to make sure the company did not use its resources to protect people who had abused its trust, and to make sure that every piece of documentation the forensic team had produced was available to whoever needed it. She was also doing something else, something she hadn't told anyone about yet. 3 weeks after the board meeting, she drove to Ethan's workshop on a Saturday morning. She hadn't called ahead. She was slightly concerned on the drive over that showing up unannounced was a boundary violation, that Ethan Carter had given her exactly as much access as the situation required, and that arriving on a Saturday with no appointment was presuming on something that hadn't been offered. She knocked anyway. He opened the door. He looked at her. He looked mildly surprised but not annoyed. "Saturday," he said. "I know, I should have called." "It's fine, come in." She came in. The workshop was different on a Saturday, more lived in, less formal. There was music playing quietly from a small speaker near the main bench. Something old. She didn't recognize it, but it had the particular quality of music a person plays when they're working because they genuinely like it, not because they're managing an atmosphere. She sat on the stool. He went back to what he was doing, something with a piece of leather, a small tool. She didn't know the name of movements that were practiced, and completely without self-consciousness. "How's the investigation going?" he asked. "Staines is cooperating. The AG's office thinks they'll have enough for formal charges within the month." Ethan nodded. He didn't look up from the leather. "And the foundation," he said. "The endowment is structured, independent board. 3 of the 5 seats are filled 2 researchers and an administrator who ran a medical nonprofit for 12 years. She paused. "The 4th seat is being held for whoever you want to name." "I have someone in mind," he said. "A woman named Dr. Patricia Walsh. She ran one of the original research programs before the funding stopped. She moved on to other work, but she's still in the field. She never stopped publishing." Victoria pulled out her notebook. "I'll contact her Monday." "She might say no," Ethan said. "She was burned by how it ended last time. Tell her it's different now." He looked up. "Is it?" She met his eyes. "I'm going to make sure it is." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded and looked back at the leather. She watched him work for a moment. Then she said what she'd actually come to say. "I want to create a position," she said, "at the company, officially. Not a title with no meaning, a real function. Someone whose specific job is to review historical agreements and commitments, to make sure the company is honoring what it said it would honor going back to the beginning." She paused. "I want to call it the Foundational Integrity Office, and I want the mandate to be independent, reporting to the board directly, not to me." Ethan had stopped working. He was listening. "I'm telling you because I want your input before I bring it to the board," she said. "Not your approval, I'm going to do it regardless. But your input because you have more understanding of where the gaps were than anyone else." He was quiet for a moment. "Who runs it?" "I don't know yet. Someone with legal and accounting background. Someone who's constitutionally incapable of being managed." She paused. "Someone like Marcus Webb, but who's willing to spend their career making powerful people uncomfortable." Ethan almost smiled. "Good luck hiring for that." "I'll find someone." He looked at the lather in his hands. He turned it over once. "It's a good idea," he said. "Make sure it has real teeth. Make sure it can actually compel documentation. If it can only request, people will just stop returning emails." "It will have subpoena power through the board," she said. "I made sure of that." He nodded. And then, after a moment, "Victoria." She looked at him. "You didn't have to come here on a Saturday to tell me that." "I know," she said. "So why did you—" She thought about how to answer that. She thought about the gala, about the boardroom, about the forensic documents and the legal proceedings and all of the institutional machinery that had been set in motion over the past 3 weeks. She thought about all of it, and then she set it aside because it wasn't the real answer. "Because I spent 20 years building something," she said, "and I thought I knew what it was built on. And then I found out I didn't. And I found out because a man showed up at my party to deliver something he'd made with his own hands, and I pointed at him in front of 400 people, and the room laughed." She stopped. "I don't want to be the person who does that. I don't want the company to be the institution that does that. And I think the way you stop being that person is you keep coming back. You keep asking. You keep making sure the thing you're building is built on something real." She met his eyes. "So I came on a Saturday, because that's what keeping coming back looks like." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. "There's a project I'm working on," he said. He nodded toward the far end of the bench, a series of materials laid out with the careful preparation of something that hadn't started yet, but had been thought about for a long time. "A collection. 12 books bound together. I've been planning it for years. Kept putting it off." He paused. "I'm going to do it now. One for each year the foundation was dark. Each one dedicated to a different area of research the programs would have pursued." He looked at her. When it's done, if you want, you can put it somewhere people will see it, not as a display, not as a PR object. He said this with a precision that was clearly intentional. As a record, so people remember what was supposed to happen and didn't and what's happening now. Victoria was quiet for a moment. "I'd like that very much," she said. He nodded. He went back to work. She stayed for another 20 minutes, not talking much, just being in the room while he worked. It wasn't awkward. That was the thing that struck her later driving home. It wasn't awkward at all. It was the specific ease of being in the presence of someone who is entirely comfortable with themselves and discovering that the comfort is contagious. She thought about leadership, about what she had believed leadership looked like for most of her career. The authority, the decisiveness, the ability to walk into a room and reshape it. She had been good at all of those things. She was still good at them. But she was beginning to understand that they were instruments, not the thing itself. That you could be decisive and still be wrong. That you could reshape a room and still be diminishing it. That the quality underneath all the instruments, the thing that determined whether they were being used for something worth using them for, was something quieter and harder to develop than any of the skills she'd spent 20 years perfecting. She thought about a man who'd had every reason to be angry and had chosen instead to be useful. Who had built beautiful things in a quiet room? Who left the porch light on? Who told his daughter the truth in words a 10-year-old could hold without dropping? She thought about what she wanted to build now, not the company she knew what she was doing with the company. Herself. The version of herself that came after the gala, after the files, after the boardroom, after a Saturday morning in a workshop, where a man made something careful and precise while music played from a small speaker. She wanted to build something worth the foundation. The Claire Carter Foundation opened formally 4 months later. The ceremony was small and intentional, not a gala, not a press event. A meeting room at a medical research center. 12 people. Dr. Patricia Walsh had said yes on the second call, after Victoria explained, without corporate language, exactly what had happened and what the foundation was going to do about it. Walsh had been quiet on the phone for a long moment, and then said, "I've been waiting for someone to say that for 13 years. She had flown in from Boston for the opening. Ethan brought Lily. She stood next to her father in a room full of researchers and doctors, and one CEO who was still learning what she was doing, and she listened to Dr. Walsh talk about the work the foundation was going to fund, the screenings, the early intervention protocols, the genetic research that had advanced enough in 13 years that the programs could pick up with far better tools than the ones they'd started with. And Lily listened with the focused attention she brought to everything that deserved it. When Walsh finished speaking, the small room applauded. And then there was the quiet settling that follows the formal part of things, when people begin to talk to each other, and the event becomes a gathering. Lily tugged Ethan's sleeve. He leaned down. She said quietly close to his ear, "She said the programs could save thousands of people, Dad. Thousands." "I know," he said. She looked at him. "That's Mom's name doing that." He straightened up. He looked at the room, at the researchers, at Walsh, at Victoria, standing near the back with the particular posture of someone who is trying to take up less space than usual, who is learning what it feels like to be in a room as a witness, rather than the authority, and he breathed. "Yeah," he said. "That's exactly what it is. Dide. Yeah, kaisad bre."
Bebe?
Later, after the gathering wound down, and people collected coats and said goodbyes, and the room began to empty, the way rooms do when the important thing has already happened, Victoria found Ethan near the door. "Thank you for being here," she said. "Of course," he said. She looked at Lily, who was talking to one of the young researchers, with the complete lack of self-consciousness of a child who hasn't yet learned to be intimidated by credentials. The researcher was showing her something on a tablet, explaining something, and Lily was asking questions rapidly, the way she asked questions when she found something genuinely interesting. "She's extraordinary," Victoria said. "She is," he agreed. without modesty, and without performance. Just the simple acknowledgement of a man who knows what he has and is grateful for it every day. Ethan. Victoria paused. She had been thinking about how to say this for 4 months, and she still wasn't sure she had the right words, so she decided to use the ones she had. I spent a lot of my career believing that the most important thing you could do was be the most powerful person in the room. That reach was the same as impact. That authority was the same as leadership. She stopped. You changed how I think about that. He looked at her. I didn't do anything. You showed up, she said. And then you showed up again. And then you walked into a boardroom full of people who owed you everything and asked for something that wasn't even for yourself. She shook her head. That's not nothing. He was quiet for a moment. Claire used to say, he said slowly, that the measure of a person wasn't what they did when everyone was watching. It was what they did when only one person was watching. He paused. She meant Lily. She meant you raise a child, and that child watches everything. Every decision. Every response. Every time you choose to do the hard thing or the easy thing. He looked at his daughter across the room. I never stopped knowing Lily was watching. Victoria followed his gaze. Lily had asked the researcher something that made the researcher laugh, a genuine surprised laugh, the kind that comes when a child asks exactly the right question in exactly the right way. She was her father's daughter, and she was her mother's way. And the foundation that bore Claire Carter's name was going to run on real money, with real researchers doing real work, and somewhere in the future, in the years that were still unmeasured and unwritten, people were going to be alive because of it. People who would never know the name Ethan Carter, or the name Claire Carter, or the story of a gala and a delivery box, and a man who built something beautiful and walked away from everything except the things that actually mattered. They would just be alive. And that was the whole point. That had always been the whole point. Ethan Carter drove home that evening with his daughter in the passenger seat, and she talked the whole way about cardiac arrhythmia research and genetic screening technology, and a researcher named Dr. Walsh, who she had decided was one of the coolest people she had ever met. He listened to every word. He asked questions. He drove. When they got home, he pulled into the driveway and turned off the engine, and they sat there for a moment in the comfortable quiet of a father and daughter who have spent enough time together that silence between them doesn't need to be filled. Dad, Lily said. Yeah. I'm going to be a cardiologist. He turned and looked at her.
That will be more.
She was 10 years old, completely certain, looking straight ahead through the windshield, with the expression of someone who has just made a decision that is not actually new, that has been forming for a while, and has simply arrived at the moment of being said out loud. He thought about Claire. He thought about a Tuesday morning and a foundation and 15 years of keeping the porch light on. Okay, he said. You're not going to say it's a big decision and I should think about it. Do you need to think about it? She considered. No. Then okay, he said. She nodded, satisfied, and got out of the car. He sat there another moment. Then he got out too. He left the porch light on the way. He always did, not out of habit, not out of ritual, but because it was the right thing to do. Because someone coming home should always find a light waiting for them. Because that is what love looks like when you strip away everything that isn't essential. It looks like showing up. It looks like staying. It looks like building something real in a quiet room when no one is watching, and keeping it real when the whole world finally turns around to look. It looks like a man who never needed a corner office or a title or 400 people in a chandelier-lit room to know exactly who he was and what he was worth. It looks like leaving the light on every single night, without fail,